Okay.
So enjoy yourselves.
Hi, Martha. It's Janet from church.
Hello, Janet from church. How are you?
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello.
So is Mary on her way?
Mary's on.
Mary's on.
Oh, Mary
we're
is
just
on?
we're just waiting a few minutes for everyone.
Give it a couple minutes.
Hi, Mary. It's Lindy.
Hi, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Everybody's staying healthy and well and safe?
As far as we know.
Okay, we'll give this a few more seconds. I see the count climbing in participants, so let's let a few more people join so they don't miss anything.
Great.
Okay, it's about a minute after 5, and I'm deeply grateful to all of you for taking some time out of your evening to join our town hall. So why don't we get started? I want to, first of all, thank you for joining, but also recognize Quentin King, who will be moderating this session. Quentin, do you want to come on for a minute?
Sure. Thank you, Mary. And thanks everyone for joining tonight. Sorry. I know my screen says Spencer, but I am indeed Quentin King. I'm Mary's policy director. I've been on the campaign since the beginning, January. Let's see, I want to let everyone know that we are recording this tonight so we can share it on social media. And also, if you have questions, please submit them in the chat box and we'll try and take them. We're also going to ask some questions, or we'll ask Mary some questions that were submitted beforehand. We got quite a few questions, but tonight we're just taking the ones that related to crime and public safety. So if you have something else, we may cover in a future town hall. With that, I think I will give it back to Mary.
Thank you, Quentin. I do want to recognize Quentin, who joined me at the very beginning of this campaign. He left the NAACP to be the policy director for the campaign. He's been an enormous amount of help to me and particularly on this topic tonight. So let me just begin by saying this election is now less than 6 weeks away. The State Board of Elections will start mailing ballots on May 1st. So that's not very far from now. It's right around the corner. And I hope you agree with me that this is a pretty critical election for our city. So tonight's town hall is on the topic of public safety. As Quentin said, we have some questions in advance, but we're also going to take them live. I'll keep my answers pretty short so we can get through a lot of questions and keep it lively. So let me begin by saying that I think the coronavirus and the economic fallout are taking a terrible toll on our city. We're all at home, and I hope staying safe and well as we work through this. I'm joining you from my kitchen tonight. But the number one issue on voters' minds is still public safety. We hear that over and over again and in every survey. When we take away our sense of personal security, we have lost something critical. And I believe strongly that we cannot be a city where crime defines us and where the outside world looks at Baltimore and just thinks about crime. We have got to change this. I think it's time to call this the emergency that it is. I'd like to see us bring the same level of focus and urgency to crime that we're bringing to the coronavirus, because I believe it is just as critical for our city to tackle this with a much stronger sense of emergency. I have said that I don't think we need more crime plans. We have decades of experience and so many people with experience on criminal justice and solving crime problems in Baltimore. What we need is a mayor who's going to lead on this issue, who's going to back our police commissioner, give him the resources he needs, bring all the stakeholders together, and be accountable. I've said that I will support Police Commissioner Michael Harrison. We have had 5 police commissioners since 2015. I do not think that turnover in that job is any recipe for success in getting after these intractable problems. I've also said that I will help the city comply with the consent decree from the US Department of Justice that we have been operating under since 2017. This is the most important way to restore trust in our police department and the community. I know that that's going to be difficult to accomplish. It can't happen overnight, but I want to see a faster timetable in making that happen. And finally, I want to engage with all of our partners in city government, in communities across the city, with our state and federal partners and all the city agencies that touch crime, to get everyone on the same page and to finally start making things happen. I know that the mayor and the police commissioner can't do this alone, but we do need a sense of cooperation and collaboration that is missing in the current scene. So that's something that's very important to me. And I always say when I talk about crime and public safety that we don't just have a crime problem in Baltimore, we have an opportunity problem. We need a mayor who's not just going to tackle the crime problems, but also work on the economic opportunities, particularly for youth and adults without jobs in Baltimore, that is so connected to the desperation people feel in this city and the reason why we have too many citizens turning to crime. So I'm going to just stop there. I've sort of laid out the big umbrella, but I think the most interesting way to conduct this hour is to just engage in your questions. So I'm going to ask Quentin to lead off with a question or two that we've gotten before the meeting, but then we'll just start taking live questions and keep it lively. So Quentin, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mary, for the intro. And we already have a couple great questions in the chat, but I'll lead off with one we got beforehand. So with a candidate that has previously served as a police officer in this race and with other former elected officials in the race, why do you think you would be a good mayor for the city?
Because I think we need a leader who's going to convene. I don't think that you need to have been a police officer to be a mayor who will be accountable for public safety in Baltimore. My background is in managing large organizations, large budgets, and complex problems, building strong teams, and getting people to work together. I think I have a pretty good sense of what the history and the current issues on the table are in public safety in Baltimore, and I am eager to get to work on them.
Great. So Bonnie Phipps asked, do you have any thoughts on the study that the study of the police department that came out of Morgan State in the Sun yesterday?
Mhm. So I think Bonnie's referring to a survey that Morgan State University conducted in the spring of 2019, where they asked over 600 citizens in Baltimore about their views on the police department. And what the survey showed was a very deep lack of satisfaction and trust in the police department. This is the core issue that we're tackling with the consent decree and the work on rebuilding trust in Baltimore. We know how damaging the Freddie Gray tragedy and the unrest that followed that, the deeply disturbing report that the Department of Justice wrote about Baltimore's police practices, historic bias and racism in policing. These are big issues, but they are on the table. And I think the Morgan State survey gave us kind of a benchmark of how people are looking at police a year ago. And it shows us what more ground we need to cover before we have a healthy relationship between the police and the community.
Great. So in your intro, you talked about a little bit about economic development. So how can Baltimore attract business to the city given the current crime rate?
I think we begin with business retention. We have to make the businesses that are here today feel comfortable staying in the city, working in the city, employing in the city. I would appoint a deputy mayor for economic development that would be 100% focused on growth in Baltimore and giving people opportunities that have been denied them. This is particularly important for youth. We have a group of 16 to 24-year-olds in Baltimore with an unemployment rate 4 times the national average. We have too many citizens leaving prison without any hope of getting a job and ending up going back into prison. This is a critical issue for Baltimore. It's why I always talk about economic development at the same time as solving crime problems in Baltimore.
Thank you. So, would you please elaborate a little bit on your crime plan and your plan to reduce violence and crime in Baltimore?
Actually, I'm here because my dad's downstairs taking care of my sister.
I've got some help.
And I gotta do something, so that's
So-
why I'm here up here.
I think to tackle violent crime, we go back to this concept of focused deterrence, where you put your resources at the most violent repeat offenders who are often known to the criminal justice system, and putting a lot of resources on this small group of offenders who are responsible for a disproportionate amount of the crime. That's not rocket science, but I think it's all about execution. How do we bring the police department, parole and probation, juvenile services, every city agency that touches these individuals to bear on stopping them from repeat offenses and also making them responsible? If they repeat offense again, they are going into jail. I think we have to be tough on crime for the most violent offenders. At the same time, I think we need to work with our youth more directly on de-escalation programs and diversion programs to keep them from committing crimes. And we have some good examples of things that work. I just think we need to scale them up and put more resources and focus on them. Where we see something that is working, that is materially reducing crime in a neighborhood or community, let's get behind that and put more force behind that. So I think the concepts of focused deterrence, diversionary programs, investing more in technology. We have very outdated technology that could help us get more real-time data on crime commission in Baltimore, responding more swiftly, and then getting the data so that we can go back in and look at exactly where we're seeing crime patterns and focus the efforts there. So I think it's a mix of things, but I think we need to think about violent offenders differently than low-level offenders who can be deterred from crime. And we have to think about making our police force more productive by using technology much more effectively.
So let's do one more pre-submitted question and then jump into the chat.
Sir.
So previously someone asked, do you think Marilyn Mosby in the Baltimore State Attorney's Office have done an effective job of prosecuting dangerous, repeat violent offenders?
I would give Marilyn Mosby credit for raising the bar on the quality of evidence that's needed to prosecute cases. I think she has made that a focus, and I think that the recent report that came out, I guess it's a few years old, but it was on the Homicide Detectives Department, showed that there was inadequate training and inadequate evidence put forth to prosecute cases. We have to do a better job with that. At the same time, I know that there are many victims' families who are discouraged by the low rate of closure of cases in Baltimore and are looking for personal closure on the loss of a loved one. So I think I'm disappointed in the low level of closure of open cases. We need to see much more traction and progress on that. But I think it comes back to building a better working relationship between the police department and the state's attorney's office. That's the kind of problem that I worked on in the public sector. When I was in the Obama administration, I often had to convene different political parties, people with different agendas, people with diametrically different views. I don't think we can disagree about the need to reduce crime and improve prosecutory results in Baltimore. If we can agree on that, then let's find the path forward to work better on this.
Great. So Lindsay Thompson says, behavioral health and violence are the top two priorities in the health department's Healthy Baltimore 2020 blueprint. How do you see the health department and police departments working together?
Excuse me? I'd like to tell you something.
We know there are many public health elements of criminal activity in Baltimore. I have published a paper on my website about the public health disparities in Baltimore and the gaps that we need to close there. I think people living in unhealthy neighborhoods, in unsafe housing, in high crime areas are very prone to criminal activity. And I think that we need to address many elements of this through a public health lens. So that blueprint is a good starting point for work on that.
Great. How can Baltimore recruit more police officers to the department?
We have a huge human capital problem in our police department. We know we are down hundreds of officers. I think the first thing to do is to really work on going deep into our public education system in high school to see whether we can invite more students to consider a career in public safety and move those students towards our police academies and into training programs to become officers. That would be a great step forward in terms of recruiting more officers who live and work in the city. I also know that our compensation levels are not comparable with some of the surrounding counties. Baltimore is a hard city to work in as a police officer. We need to make sure we are offering at least comparable compensation to the competition in surrounding counties. I think there are things we can do with incentives to live and work in Baltimore, including housing and student loan assistance. So I think I would look at the compensation structure, the incentives, the recruiting, but most importantly, we have to have a professional police department that is an attractive work assignment. And I think having a good leader at the top of the police department, which I believe Commissioner Harrison is, creating a much more professional, well-trained police force is going to make it a more attractive assignment for people to work in this city.
Thanks, Mary. So Bob Merbler asks, given that the majority of crime in Baltimore, especially violent crime, is related to drug trafficking, why do you feel that drug trafficking in Baltimore is so prevalent here versus other cities, and what can we do about it?
Well, we are in a prime East Coast location for trafficking drugs. We're a port city. We are a transportation hub. I think we need to work harder with the federal agencies that can bring more to bear on both drug and gun trafficking in the city of Baltimore. These are national issues, they're bigger than Baltimore, and I think that we need to engage our partners more aggressively to try to break these cycles and this type of particular insidious crime in Baltimore.
Thank you. So, do you support flight surveillance in the city?
I have supported the pilot program for flight surveillance. I think it's worth trying. If we can save some lives using surveillance, I think that we should build all the privacy protections that we can. We should test the pilot. We don't know yet whether it will be effective. But I think given our crime situation, we should use every tool at our disposal with appropriate safeguards and with an understanding that if it's not working or if it's violating personal privacy rights, we will take it down. I'm watching the court challenges on this carefully. I have said publicly that I think we should give it a try. And again, if we find that it's not effective or that it is violating citizens' rights, we'll either reformat it or we'll pull it down.
Mayor Braverman asks, how will you increase job opportunities for unemployed and underemployed residents so there's less need to turn to crime? I'd also ask, how would you increase opportunities for formerly incarcerated individuals?
Those are two great questions. I think we need to invest in our education system. I support the Kerwin Commission recommendations. I think we have to offer more opportunities for kids in high school who may not choose to go on to college. We can do a better job with career and technical education at the high school level. And I think giving students a path towards a career, a job, or higher education is absolutely critical. We have a 70% graduation rate from our public high schools in Baltimore. We need to raise that, and we need to give kids real opportunities. So I think we can do more to connect high school graduates to real jobs with apprenticeships, internships, and a strong focus on career and technical education. For recidivism and attacking the problem of people leaving prison, not getting a job, committing another crime, and ending up back in prison, I think we have some good programs in Baltimore. I like Turnaround Tuesday. I like the Center for Urban Families. They have vast experience working with people, reconnecting them to their families, to communities, and to jobs. But we are getting the thousands of people leaving prison each year in Baltimore hundreds of jobs. That's not enough. We need to find thousands of jobs. So I would put more resources behind programs like that. And I think we could be much more innovative in the city by helping create the businesses, the opportunities where they will make it a point to hire people who have prison records and want a second chance. We can do much more with that population.
This was pre-submitted. It appears that one of your main competitors for winning this election is Thoreau. His platform highlights approaches to reduce crime. His background as an attorney may especially resonate with some voters. What distinguishes you from Thoreau on your approaches and ability to execute your crime plan and other issues of importance for Baltimore?
We don't need a prosecutor as mayor in Baltimore. We need a leader and a manager. The mayor's job is a big job, and it covers many areas, including public safety. I think what we need is someone who can manage a large and complex organization who's done that before, who has hired good teams and strong talent, and has a track record of building bridges across constituencies, across different channels to get people to work together. This is a big issue for Baltimore, public safety, but it takes a strong manager and leader who's going to be accountable and who's going to be tough on all the parties that have a stake in this. So I don't think a prosecuting background is necessary for this role. I also think that I would come at this with absolutely no political ambition other than to run the city of Baltimore, to do it well, and to restore a sense of justice and a sense of public safety in our city. So I think I have a very strong background to do this, and I bring a broad palette of experience, not just in management and leadership, but specifically in urban planning, in economic development, and in the very things that we need to take the city forward.
Gary Bonner asks, can crime really decrease when 22% of Baltimoreans are below the poverty line, given what data tells us about the relationship between crime and poverty?
That's exactly the issue that I want to tackle. We have made no progress in the city over the last decades of reducing the amount of poverty in Baltimore. And I think that does fuel a sense of hopelessness, a sense of desperation, and it is often a reason people turn to crime. We need to jump on this. Baltimore is at the bottom of large cities in terms of moving people out of poverty. There's a lot of work that's been done on this concept of mobility from poverty. And looking across the country, I've seen so many examples of cities that have made progress on this. And I do believe there's a connection between poverty and crime. And we have an obligation as a city to take this on and begin to move the needle. We can do that with greater investments in education, but we can also do it with a much stronger workforce development and opportunities program. That's what I want to do.
Great. How could you tackle police corruption in the department, given that the consent decree highlighted some, let's just say, problems of the department for the last few decades?
I think it was more than just problems. I mean, it was a pretty damning indictment of police activity in Baltimore. I think it begins with leadership at the top. I think you need a police commissioner who's going to send a very strong message down the ranks about what an ethical police department looks like. Commissioner Harrison has brought a program in called EPIC, which is Ethical Policing is Courageous. He did this in New Orleans, and it is basically a peer program where officers work with each other. If they see another officer engaging in misconduct or unacceptable behavior, this reduced complaints about police misconduct in New Orleans significantly. I think that's a good place to start. But more than that, I think we have a real opportunity here as we rebuild human capital in the department to train officers differently and to give them a professional environment where officers can thrive and corruption cannot. I think that we have that obligation in front of us, but it's also an opportunity. So I think strong leadership at the top. I think putting resources into the Civilian Review Board, into the Public Integrity Bureau, which is where citizens can register complaints about police, is important. We need to have checks and balances on police conduct, and we need to have strong leadership from the top. And I will support the police commissioner in any way that I can to make sure that people have a very different image of Baltimore's police. And if we do find corruption, that those individuals will be prosecuted. There's just no other way to talk about this. I think we have a big job to restore confidence and trust in the police department. And one way to do that is to reduce any opportunity for corruption and to jump on it if we ever see it again.
So this question was submitted earlier today. The press is reporting that BPD's Central District will be moving from its downtown location to the Baltimore Sun's former headquarters in Mount Vernon. Based on any info you may have, does this make sense from an operational and financial standpoint? From an urban planning perspective, how might this move affect the surrounding areas for both new and old locations?
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand there may be some cost savings if we're able to include in that space some of the emergency services. I think I saw a figure of $800,000 of cost savings, and certainly we want to be as efficient as possible in the police department budget. But I also think if it is a way to give officers a professional environment, a new space, I think that that's important. I think they deserve to work in modern, good space and feel good about where they are working. Our police officers work hard, they work long hours, and I think we should give them a good physical location. As far as putting it in Mount Vernon, I think it's good to have police presence in different parts of the city. So moving them away from their current location downtown, a little bit further up in the city, just creates another locus of presence. So it sounds like a good plan to me.
So YL has a question about abandoned houses. You know, given that abandoned houses can sometimes be used for illicit purposes, what would be your plan to remove them in the city?
Mm-hmm. So we have approximately 17,000 vacant houses in Baltimore, and that number has not changed very much over the last 5 years. I would like to do much more with renovating those houses, taking them down where they are beyond repair, and creating more green space and open space in communities. But vacant houses are a target for crime, no question. We have a program called Vacants to Value, which allows small developers to buy houses at very low prices, fix them up, and put them back on the market for homeownership or rental. We have not put enough resources behind that program, and I think it's a very good one for Baltimore. So I would work hard to reduce the amount of vacant houses in Baltimore and make sure we make these neighborhoods more safe. We have some beautiful architecture in Baltimore. Some of it can be restored and I think would be a great addition to the city, but some of it probably needs to be taken down. I just would like to be more aggressive working that problem so we don't end up with just a constant inventory of vacant houses that attract crime.
So Josh wants to know if there are any programs to reduce recidivism that you know about, or are there any creative ones you'd like to see happen in the city?
Mm-hmm. I was reading a newspaper article about a company in Cincinnati that has as its only requirement for its workforce that you must have a prison record. They have made a commitment to hire people and give them second chances and provide a lot of social services to allow them to thrive. They are paying a living wage, they're providing training, and they're providing a lot of support for people who've had time in prison and are trying to get back on their feet. I see in Baltimore employers that are more open to hiring people that have a prison record. I think we can do more with that. And I think we could use programs. I mentioned earlier the Center for Urban Families. I mentioned Turnaround Tuesday. We have examples where nonprofit institutions in Baltimore are working on this. I would like to be a better partner from the city to give them more scope and scale to do more of that.
Thanks. So, how would you bring all the stakeholders together to address this issue? We know in the past that sometimes some of the players have not gotten along. How could you do that differently?
My approach is usually to first build a personal relationship with each person, to go see them and say, let me understand how you're looking at this, what your issues are, and how we can work together. Once you build those relationships, then you start bringing all the parties together. I had to do this repeatedly in the Obama administration, sometimes pulling together Democrats, Republicans, various constituencies with vastly different agendas, and say, let's agree on what the common goal is here, and then let's find the path to get there. This is leadership, it's management, but it's also something that I've done before. And I appreciate that there are people with very different political agendas and history in Baltimore. I am an outsider to that political stew. I am not an outsider to Baltimore. And I think I could come in with a fresh perspective without any baggage and work with people across the aisle and across these divides to say, we all love this city. We all recognize the scourge that crime has inflicted on us, and we all want that to change. So let's work together, and if you're not willing to partner, then I'm willing to call that out. But I would first like the opportunity to see whether we can't get a much more constructive conversation and then action on reducing crime in Baltimore.
Thanks. So Lisa N. asked, what do you think of innovative programs like ROCA and their ability to help reduce crime? what has been their effectiveness so far in the city? And I'm going to add in, what did you think of the day that you met them?
I spent an afternoon driving around with one of ROCA's staff members, knocking on doors to meet youth in Baltimore that we believe are at risk of repeat criminal activity. And I saw exactly how hard it is to engage with youth who often don't want to be found, don't want to be engaged with at all. But the labor intensive work to reach out to these individuals repeatedly in some cases, and then to draw them into a community that is focused on their rehabilitation, their engagement with work and education is really critical. I mean, it is really, labor intensive, as I said, but it is changing the behavior and the mindset of youth, who many of whom have given up on Baltimore as their future. So ROCA has not been in Baltimore that long. It is a successful program in Boston, and I think we need to give it time, and we need to give it support. It's not reaching as many youth as we would like it to. If we find that it's effective, then we should scale it up.
Great. Yeah. Should Governor Hogan and institutions like Hopkins have done more to address gun violence in Baltimore?
Wow. I guess I would say I think everyone should be doing more to reduce gun violence in Baltimore. I think working with our academic institutions is critical. We have such talent in this city. Hopkins has a long history of work on gun violence that I think is useful here. I think working with the state is particularly important to bring resources to bear in Baltimore to reduce violence in the city. So I'm not sure that I think I would call out just those two parties, because I think we all own this, and I think we all need to work on these things.
And I had a question from Paula. What do you think about tougher mandatory minimum sentences for possession of illegal guns in Baltimore City?
I think it's a case-by-case piece of work, but I do think that illegal possession of guns is something that we have to take a very hard look at, and I think that there do have to be consequences. So tougher sentences may be the answer there. I just am reluctant to say that it's the answer for every single individual involved in that. I would like to see us, again, partner with federal agencies, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, for example, the U.S. Attorney's Office, to really see what more we can bring to bear on gun trafficking in Baltimore. This issue is just bigger than our city, and I think we need a lot of help with it.
Thank you. Gary Bonner has another question. Do you think we can incarcerate our way out of the crime problem?
No. I mean, there are different types of crimes that we need to talk about. I think the violent crime may require incarceration. I think there are many lower levels of crime where we can bring other resources to bear to avoid the trap of repeated incarceration of young people who will never get off that track. So I think we need to be careful talking about the calibration of crime that we're talking about and what are the best resources for each type of violation or each type of crime that we're considering. And some of them, I think, probably need to be reclassified. I'm not sure that some of the low-level drug offenses that we've incarcerated people for should be treated that way. I think we need to think more broadly about how we can bring different approaches to those situations.
Do you have a plan to get squeegee kids out of intersections?
I think squeegee kids are the perfect example of the lack of economic opportunity in Baltimore. Washing windshields is not a career or future, and we have not given our youth different options. And often these kids are coming from pretty desperate situations. I think we need to get them off the streets. It's not safe for them to be working in traffic. It is not a healthy situation for Baltimore. I think we're going to have to do something, again, pretty labor intensive. We're going to have to sit down with each of them and say, what brought you to this position? And what resources do we need to bring to bear here to get you to do something different? I would not arrest squeegee kids. I don't think that's the answer, but I do think that we need to get them off the streets and we need to give them different opportunities.
The current mayor received some attention last year when he said that he's not the one committing the murders. Who is to blame for the high crime rate in Baltimore City?
Well, let me lead by saying that I believe the mayor is accountable for public safety. And I think that lack of leadership is to blame for the rampant crime situation we have in Baltimore. I do not see at City Hall that we have brought to fighting crime. I don't see that we've brought the kind of collaboration and constructive approach to holding every city agency, every party, every stakeholder accountable. I also don't think that we have engaged community correctly. We haven't really talked about community policing. This is a plan that was recently released by the police department. It's part of the consent decree. There are some very willing partners in Baltimore that want to work on crime issues. I would point to Act Now, which is a movement that Reverend Al Hathaway has started with now 12,000 or more supporters. That's a really good example of using the faith-based community, community associations, neighborhoods, and citizens to help young people avoid entering a life of crime. So I think solving crime is not just a top-down problem. I think it is a broad engagement of all the stakeholders, as I say, in Baltimore who want to solve this problem. When I go to community association meetings, there's often a neighborhood police officer there reporting on crime. And we're beginning to have a better dialogue with the police department and neighborhoods, but we've got a lot of ground to cover there. And I think involving the communities, building these plans with communities, responding to the unique circumstances and concerns of the neighborhoods and communities in solving crimes invites people to be part of the solution. And we can stop talking about blame and finger pointing and who's at fault here and start talking about, okay, how are we going to fix this? And who needs to be part of the solution? And let's get everyone together to do that. And so I like what I'm seeing in terms of the evolution of the community policing plans. I believe we need to see a much stronger police presence in communities in a different way, where police are engaging as partners, not as arresters, not as purely law enforcement, but giving people a sense of security and a sense that the police are working with them. But there's a lot of work to be done here.
I want to remind everyone that this town hall is for public safety. We're getting some really good questions. They're all great, but some aren't directly related. I would suggest emailing us at info@electmarymiller.com or reaching out to us on social media if you want answers to questions related to things like transit. Mary, would you want to elaborate on human capital problems that you think the BPD has?
Mm-hmm. Well, I talked about this a little bit before, but we know that we need more police officers in Baltimore. We know that we have some sworn police officers that are in desk jobs, administrative roles, that we could move back out onto the street, perhaps with some retraining. That might be one way to increase the number of ranks of officers that are out in community and more visible and increase the sense of security and police presence around the city. But I think we do have a big recruiting problem. We have to get more people in the pipeline to become police officers in Baltimore. We have to convince people that this is a great career. It's a good assignment, that we have great leadership. We have training potential. We have a more competitive salary and incentive structure to be a police officer in Baltimore. So there is the front end recruiting. there's a big training need in Baltimore to really train the next generation of police officers with all the values and all of the behaviors that we're looking for in a stronger community policing sense. But I think there's also need to retain police officers. Too many are retiring at too young an age. They're leaving the police force for other careers when we want to keep them in those roles if they're good police officers. So I think having a more professional, a more a police force where you're proud to work there, where you feel that you're going someplace, you're making a difference, you are really improving the quality of life in Baltimore, the sense of security and public safety. That's what we should be striving for, to keep people in the police force and to attract people to it. But it's changing the culture of policing in Baltimore. And it's having a strong human resources component, again, to recruit well, to train well, to retain well, so that we're not losing good officers out the back door after doing all that work on recruiting. I've had a lot of experience with human capital, working on building strong teams, building strong culture, and I'm eager to do this and to work with the police commissioner to have better outcomes in terms of the numbers.
Question that someone has asked is that people often say that we're spending too much on police department and public safety in Baltimore. Do you think that's true?
Well, we're spending almost a third of our budget on the public safety area. That includes fire as well as police, but it's close to $1 billion in a $3 billion budget. I will go out on a limb and say, I don't think that spending more is necessarily the problem. I think that we can spend more efficiently and effectively. I look forward to going through the public safety budget line by line. I've looked at it carefully, but I think that there's probably more detail there that needs examining. I'd like to see where we are getting the most bang for the buck. But I also think that we are probably going to have to concentrate spending more effectively in some areas to get better public safety outcomes. So my take on this is it is a management challenge. For example, if we could spend the time talking about CompStat and the technology that gives us the data that helps us find crime more quickly, jump on problems more professionally, more adequately, because we see the crime patterns. If we can do that and make our police more productive, we may be able to spend less time having police spend time coming in and filing paper reports, for example. So I think there are opportunities to spend more wisely and effectively.
Lisa says that Commissioner Harrison has been on the job for a year now, and many people feel that they haven't seen the fruits of this labor. Why do you think that is, and how long should we wait to see improvements, and what could you do differently?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. Right now, we're seeing actually quite a significant drop in crime while we were all sequestered at home and people are not out and about with the constraints on social distancing. I think that you can't turn this around overnight, but I do think we need to bring a greater sense of, as I call it, emergency to these problems. I see the groundwork that Police Commissioner Harrison has laid. I'm watching carefully every policy and practice that he rolls out, whether it's on use of force, whether it is on community policing plans, whether it's the consent decree monitors, reporting on progress. I see how difficult it is with constrained resources to get this done quickly. Nevertheless, I would like to bring a greater sense of urgency to this. And I think part of the solution is getting all of the parties to work together better. And I think we could move things along faster if we could do that effectively. I do think the reforms that he's making are good ones. I know we're all frustrated that we're not seeing the reduction in crime numbers as quickly as we want, but I do think that's possible. But we've got to make that investment, and we've got to keep our police commissioner in place long enough to get the job done. We can't continue with this constant turnover of police commissioners. We have a good commissioner. He did a good job in New Orleans. He did exactly what we want. He reduced crime, he settled a consent decree, and he got high marks for that. I want to give him that chance to succeed in Baltimore.
Is there anything else that sets your plan for crime and public safety in Baltimore apart from others?
I think it's largely an approach. As I said, I've read every crime plan that every candidate has put out. I've read the police commissioner's plan. I think there is a lot of overlap in these plans. And I also think that we have, as I said, decades of experience in Baltimore. We can look back to, the O'Malley years, the Sheila Dixon years, the Stephanie Rawlings Blake years. We have a lot of experience. I think we know what the elements of a successful plan are. I don't think we've brought the forces to bear to execute on that. So this just comes back to having someone who will be accountable, who will take charge, who will bring all the parties to the table and get everyone to agree on what the strategy is, what we're going to do. I don't believe that any plan is perfect either, and I hope we were all open to new ideas and thinking. But I think we know what the key elements are, and I think we just have not put the kind of energy and force behind it that we need.
Right. So this one touches on public safety as well. Sorry, I lost it in the chat. When you talk about opportunity and raising income in the city, what can you do about the benefits cliff? When a person goes through all the workforce development training and pays for it and may not receive salary benefits during that, eventually when they do get income, it may make it just enough so that they become ineligible for benefits. What could you do to change that?
I hear too many stories from people that say, I've got 12 different workforce training certificates, I've never gotten a job. I think that we need to look at exactly that kind of problem and say we need to be connecting people to jobs and incomes that make sense. We're not doing anyone a benefit if we give them such a low-wage job that they cannot have, a decent living in Baltimore with benefits. I think the city can be a much stronger quarterback in connecting workforce training with real employment opportunities that work for people. We have many nonprofits that are doing workforce training. We have not built strong enough connections with employers in Baltimore that we're putting people into those jobs. I would be eager to work on that with the Mayor's Office of Economic Development and make sure that we are reaching into high schools and working, as we talked about, with people who have prison records and working with employers to say, let's find out what you need and let's make sure that we've got people that are work ready and that the incomes from these jobs are going to help lift income in Baltimore. If we can raise income in Baltimore, we can do so much more to solve our problems of poverty and begin to solve a whole host of problems for people that need stable housing, that need good transportation, that need regular employment. We can do, and improve public health outcomes at the same time. So this is a big piece of it. The longer term needs of the city to reduce poverty will directly impact our public safety issues.
Can you tell us about how you would ensure that there would be accountability, honesty, and transparency among city government?
I believe that, first of all, the mayor should not be engaged in any outside business dealings while in office. I think we need stronger financial disclosure rules for elected officials in Baltimore. I don't think we've gone far enough with that. I think that we have to have a culture of integrity from the top of the city that is sending those messages down the ranks of what is acceptable behavior, what is not, and making sure that we never embarrass the city again. We have had just a long and sorry history of corruption and even mismanagement, and I think voters are just exhausted by that. They want someone in that office that they trust, that is going to be a person of integrity and that will never raise any of these issues for our city. We have such a lot of work to do to get Baltimore back on track. We need elected officials who, without ego or higher ambition, are just going to focus on Baltimore every day without any outside interests, with complete transparency on their finances, their taxes, and make sure that there are no untoward conflicts.
So now I'm going to ask Mary to give a final closing statement. But first, I just want to remind everyone that you can go to our website, electmarymiller.com, where we have 5 plans that touch on some of the questions you asked in the chat box. We have a plan on education, a plan on transportation, a plan on public safety, a plan on inclusive growth, and a plan on public health. So if your question wasn't answered in here, you can maybe find it on there, and always feel free to reach out to us. Now, Mary, do you want to send us off?
Well, I feel like we've touched on so many issues. I actually might hand it back to you because I do see there are more questions in the chat room. I can summarize what I think we talked about tonight, but I think might be good. Let's take another question. We've got a few more minutes here.
Okay, so we just got a question from Tom Brandt. The drug distribution business is clearly a catalyst in Baltimore's violent crime, illustrated by David Simon in The Wire almost 20 years ago, where he depicted the linkages from organized crime to the city level. Can our city police function be supplemented with FBI, DEA, and other resources?
Absolutely. If you're like me, you're probably tired of meeting people from outside of Baltimore where the only thing they know about Baltimore is that they've watched The Wire. And again, that becomes sort of the defining story of Baltimore. I think we can do more with our federal agency partners because I keep coming back to this. The drug trafficking business in Baltimore is bigger than Baltimore, and I think we need help with that. I would welcome the opportunity to work directly with the U.S. Attorney's Office, with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, to say, let's bring all these resources to bear here. It is time to break this trade. I know that prior mayors have worried about this, have tried to attack this. I think we just need to decide this day is over. We are going to bring in all the forces we can to break the drug trade in Baltimore. We spend so much time talking about homicides in Baltimore. We don't spend enough time talking about the number of lives that are lost every year to addiction, which was 800 in 2019. That is as big an emergency to me as gun violence. We really, really need help on this, and I think working with those agencies is the first step towards that, because I don't think the Baltimore Police Department on its own can solve that problem.
So we touched on this slightly a little bit earlier, but Karen McGee asked, why hasn't the partnership between city, state, and federal government been strong in the past?
I think in part because we've had turnover in these roles. And I think that I often describe Baltimore as a city of fits and starts. I think we might begin to build a good relationship where we see something that's working and then we don't stay with it. And I think we need to build those relationships, make them strong, and we have got to stick with it. I think if we abandon something midstream, or we don't fund it correctly, or we don't put the right resources on it, we're not going to succeed. So I think a lot of it is just purpose and being more focused and purposeful about staying with something, building those relationships, and making sure that the city's taking a lot of responsibility and control for these things. We cannot be passive partners in these relationships. We need to take the lead.
So Josh says that Maryland is one of 16 states that allows formerly incarcerated individuals and those behind the wall awaiting pretrial detention to vote. But the State Board of Elections' current plan for vote by mail for the special election and the primary election does not include plans to deliver ballots to these individuals. What issues do you think this raises with the democratic process, and what could you do to support citizens like these in getting access to the ballot?
Well, thank you for raising that. I was not aware of that. I think this mail-in election raises big questions about democracy. We have not done this before in Maryland. We're kind of doing it on the fly. We're trying this out for the first time. And I worry a lot about ballots reaching people and everyone having the right to vote. So I would certainly advocate that the governor, the State Board of Elections make every effort to get ballots to people that are in prison. They have the right to vote and they should be allowed to vote.
Right. And with that, we have 3 minutes left. Mary, would you want to give your closing statement now?
Sure. I will just close by thanking you for your attention and staying with this conversation. I think that coming back to what I said in the beginning, public safety is the #1 issue on voters' minds. I think that we need to elect a mayor that is finally going to get something done on this issue. We cannot continue as we are. I think that Baltimore, to thrive, needs to bring public crime to a halt. I mean, we really need to reverse these trends, and we have to change the image of our city. But most importantly, we have to change the individuals who live in the city sense of personal security. Everyone has the right to public safety in our city. I believe that is the obligation of the city and the mayor to deliver. As mayor, I will be accountable for this. I will work as hard as humanly possible to deliver on the crime plans, to reduce violent crime, to help youthful citizens of Baltimore not enter a life of crime, and to do much more to provide opportunity for our citizens. I think that there is a real chance in this election to do things differently, to bring a different kind of leadership to the city, and to restore a sense of purpose, that we're in control of our destiny here and we're going to get some things done. So I look very much forward to, first of all, winning your vote for the primary on June 2nd. Of course, you can be voting before June 2nd with your mail-in ballots. But I really want to make a change in Baltimore. I think people are hungry for change. I think they're looking for a different style of leadership, and they're looking for someone who will be honest about the challenges, but very purposeful about bringing the solutions home to Baltimore. So thank you very much for your attention. You can always send us more questions at my website, which is electmarymiller.com. We welcome that and we will respond to you. So thank you again for being here tonight, and I'll give you back your evening. Stay safe and stay well.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.